Last time I was talking to you all, I did what I could to create a consensus in a statistical field that doesn't exist yet. Spreadsheets, number crunching, averaging totals, all for an imaginary field of statistics. Pointless? Not at all. It was fun digging into the numbers and coming up with conclusions that I found after my deep dive into them. What I wasn't anticipating was just how arbitrary the criteria I set up would seem like in the video. As mentioned before, data collection for video game greatest of all time, otherwise known as GOAT, lists is a field that doesn't exist. There are no expansive box scores a la basketballreference.com to refer to, and besides the hard work from videogamecanon.com, there are rarely even websites I could find that average out the highly ranked games, outside of maybe Metacritic. But even then, Metacritic is review scores, not list placements. In other words, we're basically starting from scratch again. To reiterate a point in my previous video, I did what I could to weed out as much bias as possible by introducing a standard data pooling procedure that favored more thought out, less hot-takey lists. Not exactly possible technically, but I aimed to get as close as I could. This worked for the smaller scale and goal of trying to create that statistical baseline. Now, we need to expand on it. If I plan to continue talking about GOAT lists in whatever capacity, I need to create a standard for myself and stick with it. At the end of my last video, I presented 3 problems in data collecting from GOAT video game lists. To iron out our process, let's tackle each one individually. Let's start with the easiest one to solve. These lists are made for tribute, not to add on to a statistic. Well, we're going to take that step forward right now and treat every video game list ranking as an objective number. Are you ready? Did we do it? Okay, done. And done. Now, every game placement is an objective number. Cool. It was tough, but we got there in the end. Now we're going to move on to the more complex issues. It'll be a bit complicated, but bear with me. It's going to be worth it in the end to create that channel standard. With that said, let's begin. We're going to start with problem number 2. Standards for data collecting to average out video game ranks across different publications lists don't really exist. So, to start off, let's create our own format for displaying the data. We're going to create a box score to visualize the numbers cleaner. Box scores won't be used all the time, but this is just to create our format for future content and will be applied wherever applicable. If you look somewhere like ESPN.com or, again, basketballreference.com, a league like the NBA charts their numbers in a table displaying the different categories that the NBA tracks. Things like points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, fouls, turnovers, and a bunch of other advanced stats that don't matter for the scope of this video. We dipped our toes in this format in the last video with the inclusion of average ranking, peak, and overall series average categories, along with how they were presented. This is what I'm looking for, but let's expand our categories, creating our abbreviations along the way, much like how the box scores for ESPN.com and Basketball Reference have their own abbreviations. Since average ranking is probably the most glamorous stat here, we'll put this one up as the very last one, to give the other stats that showcase how it reached that score some love. We'll put peak right here, and slot overall series average right next to average ranking. That stat is more for when we look at an entire series, so we'll have to use it situationally. Now how about some solid number categories that won't require percentages? Placements, introduced last time, is just the number of times an individual game placed in the data range of lists. We'll insert this one right here. Like overall series average, we'll also include total series placements because it helps give an idea how much an individual game made up for an entire series representation in a data range, so this one goes here. The one universal stat for each usage will be total lists, which I'll include as a reminder for what number is being used as the baseline to pull averages from. That looks pretty good in my opinion. It'll take some getting used to recognize which abbreviation means what, so from here on out I'll be including a legend in the description of each video that spells out each abbreviation and what they mean. That should help. But yeah, box scores won't be used all the time, but when it's time to look at a game's performance, all this information will be available in that handy chart. Just for funsies, let's use this box score in a live instance. Using the dataset from last video, let's say we're looking at Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. This is how the stats from that video would look here in this box score. It had a peak of number 2, 11 placements on 39 total series placements, an average ranking of 18.3 on a 25.3 overall series average, and all of this out of 12 total lists. I think this covers as much as needed from a game out of a listing, but if there's any adjustments that need to be made in the future, I wouldn't be opposed to amending anything. Admittedly, these box scores can't be used universally yet because I haven't established a wide database of video game ranking stats, nor do I know when I'll be able to. Kinda like a basketballreference.com for video game lists, I'm just not there yet. So the box scores I use in a video will be distinct for each individual topic that I decide to tackle in that said video. But we have a visual box score now, so good start. Next up, we need to decide where we pull our data samples from. More specifically, we need to decide which lists should be used for consideration for all things data crunching. So the standard that I went with before is VideoGameCanon.com's criteria of 50 games minimum, some type of editorial oversight, and no restrictions on platforms or release dates. I really don't want to seem like I'm ripping off another person's hard work, so I really want to come up with my own standard, but this is a really good system, and one that aligns with my own personal beliefs with trying to find the absolute best of the best in the video game world. Luckily, my videos won't be sticking to just finding overall video game GOAT, but maybe directing towards specific genres, series, consoles, whichever I feel like talking about in that video. With that in mind, we'll take out the 50 games minimum standard, but I'm going to add 2 of my own caveats. No representation from one game per franchise lists that limit how many games a series can have, and at least more than one author for each list, for more than a singular opinion dictating that list. So similar criteria we used in the previous video, but now we're making it channel official going forward. Last thing on this, the sources themselves. Just about any reasonably high traffic video game websites list is eligible so long as they stay within the parameters mentioned before. So your IGNs, GameSpots, Games Radars, Game Informers, Gaming Bibles, everyone at or around their standings are good to go. We'll be more selective on which sites to use depending on the other criteria we have, blocking off one game per franchise lists, no limits on release dates and platforms, the likes of that. So far, this seems like a pretty solid foundation to build future videos off of, so we have one last problem to work out. Number 1, how do we weigh recent games against recent lists? I've been going back and forth on this, and this is probably going to be the most arbitrary aspect of this video to discuss because there's no real easy answer. The best answer of not great options in my opinion, a cutoff time frame, or rather an eligibility rule. Coming back to sports one more time, most professional sports Hall of Fames have eligibility rules to allow in new members, and the linchpin of these rules is the first year of eligibility and how long the waiting period is. The NBA is 5 years, NFL is 5 years, baseball is 5 years, so there's a bit of an industry standard in North American sports leagues for their Hall of Fame candidacy. Let's take something we can observe and place an average on in the video game industry, the lifespan of a console generation, and use this as a base. Disregarding the 8th generation, which was elongated due to the Wii U's weirdly short and failed launch, most console generations were wrapped up in around 5 to 6 years. For the sake of ease, I'm considering the following console generation to begin with the first new console release, so we'll say the Nintendo Wii started the 7th generation in this case. Let's take the over and consider the average length of a console generation 6 years. That means if we were to take a game like Red Dead Redemption 2, which was released in 2018, then its first year of eligibility for list consideration would be 2024. This feels too long in my opinion. I don't know, call it a gut feeling or an excuse if you want, but it just doesn't seem right. So how about we half this time frame? Let's call it a 3-year waiting period, so this would make 2021, this video's year of production, the first year we would take Red Dead Redemption 2 for list consideration. This means Breath of the Wild 2017's first year of eligibility was last year, and a game like The Last of Us Part 2 2020's will be in 2023, so it has 2 more years of legacy building before consideration. And that's it with our video 1 issues. We've covered a lot of items today, all in the name of clearing up how we approach talking about video game lists going forward with the channel. I know I run the risk of making things overly complicated in how videos are covered, but I thought it would be best to keep a consistent standard with whatever area I decided to cover in a video. I don't want to seem like I'm flip-flopping to create a bias or anything, so consistency is the name of the game here. With all of this being said, let's quickly recap everything we covered. Number 1, this is the box score I'll be using to present information going forward whenever applicable. I'll keep the legend on every abbreviation handy in the description. Here's hoping it doesn't cause too many issues utilizing these new units of statistics. Number 2, the standards for an acceptable list are no restrictions on platforms or release dates, some form of editorial oversight, no one game for franchise list, and at least more than one author to a list. And number 3, newer games will have a 3-year waiting period before being considered for lists from the time of release. As of this calendar year, 2021, all games released in 2018 are now eligible for consideration, and this standard will take us forward from here. Well, we relied on the research this time around, but we covered a lot of ground today still. Next time you see me, I'll have been headfirst into spreadsheets and averaged out rankings from arbitrary all-time great video game lists, because why the heck not? Thank you all very much for watching. I hope you've had a good day so far. Hope you're having a good night so far if you're watching this at night, and I hope to see you all next time.